everybody. Yes, it is I, Kenneth the K-Rock Klein, coming to you with a new episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. Of course, that's my namesake, but you know what? You already knew that by now, of course. I'm speaking to everyone, wherever you may be, whether you're listening around the world, or maybe whether or not you're just not listening to me at the moment, but you will be listening to me eventually, because I like to give out my opinions on certain sports topics. And today, I'm here to announce I'm an idiot. I'm the biggest idiot in the planet. Well, that's not really my big announcement, but I'm going to get into the reasons why I feel like I'm the biggest idiot on the planet in the world. But folks, we got some good topics we want to talk about. Texas and Georgia, they're going to be meeting up with each other this Saturday for the college game day of the week. It's number 1 Texas versus number 5 Georgia. The question, though, that everyone's mind is, how good can Texas really be? Is this the game that could be a trap game as well? And also, is there going to be a lot of pressure on the quarterbacks? Because right now, even though Quinn Ewers has been playing well and Arch Manning has played well in Quinn Ewers' absence, there seems to be a little bit of quarterback controversy from all the fans down in Austin as well. So I'm just going to give my thoughts on whether or not this is a quarterback controversy that could potentially be a bit of a problem, or is it just one of those, maybe it's just wishful thinking in a sense. And then I'm going to be talking about former U.S. President Barack Obama. He came out with his starting 5, and I have to tell you what, I was really surprised with who he put down as his top 5 for his starting lineup as well. So that's going to be my other topic as well, and then I'm going to get more into details on that. But first, folks, you may be saying to yourself, why does K-Rock feel like an idiot today? Well, I got to tell you, you know how every week I always try to do NFL predictions, making my predictions for who I think is going to win the game in a sense. And, you know, I've had some good weeks. I've had some not so good weeks and everything. But, man, last week I had the best week in terms of making my predictions. There were 14 games, bear in mind, so 4 teams didn't play last week. But there were 14 games, and I got to tell you what, I was successful in picking every single game, the winner of every single game that I believed was the team that was going to win the game. I picked up every single victory except for one. I went 13-1 last week, the best week I've ever had prediction-wise. Well, out of 14 games, but, you know, there was that 16 game in week 1 where I went 14-2 in a sense, but we're talking about a 14-game stretch where I was literally 1 game away from being perfect this week. And you may be saying to yourself, okay, what happened? Like, you might have to go back to my podcast and say, who did you pick? Did you pick Washington to beat Baltimore? No. I knew that was going to be a tough game for the Ravens because Jaden Daniels has been playing really well. But I figured Baltimore was just going to find a way to get the job done. So I didn't pick I picked the Ravens to beat the Commanders. Okay, so if that's the case, did you pick the Dallas Cowboys to beat the Detroit Lions? Why would I want to do that? I knew the Lions were going to win the game. I didn't think it was going to be by that margin, so the answer was no. What about the New York Jets, who, by the way, as of this podcast, made a big trade acquiring Devontae Adams, former wide receiver, teammate of Aaron Rodgers when they were in Green Bay? Did you pick the Jets to beat the Buffalo Bills, who were a trade away of getting Amari Cooper to the squad? No, I did not. I did not pick the Jets to beat the Bills. I picked the Bills to beat the Jets, and I got that one right just barely. I mean, there was a lot of laundry that was happening in that night's game. So what game did you pick that you are considered to be an idiot? Well, I always feel like every week there's always going to be an upset. And I probably picked the worst upset game in the history of the NFL. I'm talking, of course, about the game between the Arizona Cardinals and the Green Bay Packers. Yep. For some reason, maybe because I had a gut feeling that there was going to be an upset, maybe Kyler Murray was going to have himself a great day against the Packers. Maybe there were still some question marks about Jordan Love after coming off an injury. Was it a legitimate case that maybe Arizona was going to win? I picked the Cardinals to beat the Packers, and boy, was I day or dumb day. Yeah, I was stupid. I can't believe I picked the freaking Cardinals to beat the Packers. The Packers just destroyed Arizona 34-13. I mean, looking at the stats, you can clearly tell where I went wrong. Jordan Love, 22 of 32 for 258, 4 touchdowns and 1 interception. Compared that to Kyler Murray, who only had 22 of 32, same completion percentage, but only 214 passing yards and 1 touchdown. Like, give me a break, man. Like, why would you go against Jordan Love? Why would you pick Kyler Murray, who hasn't really developed into that elite quarterback that everyone thought he was going to be since he was drafted in the NFL? And many people believe he should still be playing baseball for all I know. But I don't know. Like, I'm still mad at myself because I don't know if I'm ever going to have another week for the rest of this season or maybe in the seasons beyond where I might be perfect. I might have that perfect week. It is so shocking and so disappointing to me that I picked the Arizona Cardinals and the Green Bay Packers. I wish I can go back in time and reverse my pick. I'm sure we all want to with all the games that we picked to make it look good. Look, I had no money involved, but it was just like, man, I wish I had a perfect week. Like, for once, a perfect week. I don't care if it's 16 games or 14 games or however many teams are on bye weeks. For once, I would like to have a perfect week. Maybe I'll get it later on this season, but man, I don't know if I can ever do better than what I did this past week from a percentage-wise. I'm not really much of a mathematician here. Like 13 divided by 14. Let me do this math problem real fast, if I may. So 13 divided by 14, that's a 92.8% completion rate. Now, what about 14 divided by 16? That's 87.5. So from a percentage perspective, I had the best week. I went 13-14. But man, that one loss, that one game I picked, picking Arizona over Green Bay, that is going to eat me alive. So, yeah, you can go ahead and boo me. I picked Arizona and Green Bay over Green Bay, and I wish I hadn't. But big win for Green Bay, and I'll tell you what, next week is going to be a real tough game for my Texans as they take on the Packers. I'll get more into my predictions later on in the show. But first, folks, I want to go ahead and start talking about college football and the big game this week between Texas and Georgia. Who do I think is going to come out on top? Is there a bit of a quarterback controversy brewing down in Austin? Well, we'll find out more about that when we continue onward. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. In some ways, this college football season has been pretty wild when you think about the landscape of college football over the last few seasons. You can argue that for the past 3 years, Georgia was the best team in college football, even though they lost the SEC championship game to Alabama, which unfortunately denied them the right to compete for a chance to make it 3 straight years in a row. And then Michigan would go on to win the national championship in what was Jim Harbaugh's last game before he took the job as head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. But you can arguably say that Georgia was the best team in college football. And going into this season, there was still that feeling that, yeah, Georgia kind of got screwed out of a chance to compete for a three-peat, but they're still one of the top dogs. They're still one of the best teams in college football. Like, they have a legitimate chance to making it 3 and 4 years, which would confirm them as a dynasty for that matter. A word that I cringe every time I think about that, mind you. But lately, Georgia has kind of had, like the season for Georgia hasn't kind of gone according to plan. Like when you look at the games for this season, they start out against Clemson, and Clemson was number 10, Georgia was number 5. Georgia destroyed Clemson, 34-3. It was no contest. Then Georgia, of course, beats Tennessee Tech 48-3. But here's where things start to get a little bit of a dicey for Georgia. Georgia barely, I mean barely, won over Kentucky 13-12. Not the greatest 13-12 game I've ever seen. I don't want to spoil that for all my fans out there, except for the ones that know that score very well. But it was a very close game, and Kentucky nearly beat them in that process. That would have been the biggest upset of the season to that point. But Georgia barely beats Kentucky, so they are at 4-0. Next game is against Alabama, and my goodness gracious, Georgia came all the way back from an early deficit to tie the game, only for Alabama and Jalen Milroe to go down the field and score the go-ahead touchdown, which would ultimately prove to be the game-winning touchdown, giving the Crimson Tide a 41-34 victory and pretty much putting Georgia in a bit of a hole. Now, Georgia has since won its last two games, beating Auburn 31-13 and Mississippi State 41-31. But you have to feel that Georgia has a legitimate opportunity to get themselves back for contention to win the SEC. That's because Alabama, after the win against Georgia, was the number one ranked team, or at least was the number one ranked team, maybe number two, but then they became the number one ranked team. And then, as we all know, Alabama suffered a crushing loss to Vanderbilt. Now, it was a one-score game, but it was crushing because who the flip loses to Vanderbilt in football? Who? Like, you're not supposed to lose to them in football. Baseball, that's okay. Bowling, that's okay. But football? Vanderbilt? You don't lose to Vanderbilt in football, especially when you're a prestigious program like Alabama. But, I mean, to Vanderbilt's credit, they have developed into a pretty good team, and certainly not necessarily a contender for the SEC, but definitely a dark horse team that can legitimately cause some trouble for contenders. So, Alabama now is currently the number 7th ranked team. Georgia's number 5. And they have a legitimate chance to get themselves back to at least the number 1, if not number 2 seed in all of college football. But in order for that to happen, they're going to go down south, or down, I should say eastbound and down, to take on the Texas Longhorns, who currently are the number 1 ranked team in all of the country. Now, it's so crazy how things have happened in college football, at least from Texas's side. Like, fans have always been so used to Texas fans saying, well, we're going to be back, we get a big win and we're back in this and that. And Texas, has a legitimate case where they're back after a big win, but then they don't seem to follow that up and they kind of underachieve. Last season, though, the Longhorns did make the college football playoff and could have beaten Washington. That would have set them up for a national championship game appearance against Michigan, and that would have been a pretty great game. Probably a better game than what Michigan and Washington was. So now Texas is the number 1 ranked team in the country, and it's so crazy. I read a stat somewhere that to this point, the Texas Longhorns defense have given up fewer than 7 points per game, whereas compared to the national championship team, in 2005 with Vince Young and company, that defense conceded fewer than 17 points. So a 10-point difference for that matter. But, I mean, you can't argue that Texas is not the best team in college football to this point. Like, look at the numbers that they're conceding. Shutting out Colorado State, defeating Michigan 31-12, UTSA 7 points, Louisiana Monroe 3 points, Mississippi State 13 points, Oklahoma. See, the Red River shootout it wasn't a shootout. It was a bloodbath. 34-3, Texas defeated the Sooners. It was no contest for that matter. So now you look at Texas' schedule. This game against Georgia will without question be the biggest game for the Longhorns this season. If you get through this game, you pretty much have a straightforward path all the way until you reunite with an old friend, an old comrade, an old brother, an old rival of yours down in College Station at Texas A&M. That should be a legitimate game as well. So, Here's the way I look at it. This is the game that Texas has to win if they want to be perceived as national championship contenders. Get through this game, everyone's knowing that you are the favorites to win the national championship. You would at least have a legitimate chance of ending the season with a bye, a first round bye as a top 4 seeded team. And then you go on from there to win 2 to 3 games all the way to winning, the national championship, potentially, of course, winning the national championship. But here's the thing about Texas that has really been of interest. Quinn Ewers got the start against Oklahoma, and remember, he started the season as a quarterback, but then got injured. So he was out with a rib injury. And before you know it, they bring in Arch Manning, the son of Cooper Manning, who is also the older brother of Peyton and Eli Manning. And basically, everybody was wanting to know, what would Arch Manning do? Well, Arch Manning played so well in that stretch that suddenly you have this case that, hey, Quinn Ewers might be coming back, but assuming that things don't go well for him, what if Arch Manning is the guy? Arch Manning could be the quarterback of the future, in a way. Like, he's a guy that could bring this Texas team to a national championship. And those comments, those theories, seem to be evident when on the very first play of the game against Oklahoma, Quinn Ewers threw an interception. And that's what led everyone to think, okay, you need to bring Arch Manning back into the game. Like, Arch Manning has played so well. Stick to what's been working. Stick to what's been hot lately. Stick with the hot guy. I say hot guy as in, they're playing very well. They have a lot of momentum going for them. But stick with them. Like, why bring Quinn Ewers back into the game? Quinn Ewers did end up going 20 of 29 for 200 yards, which it's a great game, don't get me wrong. But I think most people probably were thinking, well, he should have had maybe 300 yards, completing fewer incompletions, no interceptions and all that. And it was a dominant 34-3 for that case. And there are people out there that say Quinn Ewers should at least not be the quarterback. It should be Arch Manning. They're trying to create a quarterback controversy here. Now, here's why I think that this is a little bit of a stretch to say that quarterback controversies are, there shouldn't be a quarterback controversy. Because let's look at it this way. It's different in college football when you have a quarterback controversy than it is in the NFL. How many times in the history of college football have we had heard about a quarterback controversy on a contending team, on teams that have a legitimate chance of winning, a national championship? The only time I can think of a quarterback controversy that took place in the history, at least in my lifetime, was the Nebraska Cornhuskers during the mid-1990s. 94, you had Tommy Frazier, the mobile-esque type running quarterback, and Brooke Berringer, who was more of the pocket passer. Tommy Frazier got the start the 1994 season. He then gets a blood clot in his leg and is unfortunately having to miss out most of the rest of the season. Brooke Berringer comes in, leads Nebraska to an undefeated stretch, and before you know it, they're playing a national championship game. But this is where things got interesting because they're playing a national championship game against Miami. Tommy Frazier is back and fully healthy. They're trying to decide who's really the quarterback that should be the starter. Is it Tommy Frazier or should it be Brooke Berringer? And ultimately, Tom Osborne, the head coach of Nebraska, decides, hey, I'm going to start Tommy Frazier. I'll let Brooke play his second half, and then we'll go from there to see who's got the better hand. So ultimately, they used 2 quarterbacks to win the national championship game, which kind of worked itself out. But then 1995 happens, and now you're thinking, all right, who's the quarterback? Tommy Frazier or Brooke Berringer? They worked itself out. Tommy Frazier ends up beating Brooke Berringer to get the starting job, and he leads Nebraska to what is arguably one of the 2 best college football teams ever assembled. You could throw Miami in 2001 as a team that has a legitimate chance of being better than the Nebraska squad for that matter. But that team in 95 for the Cornhuskers was a dominant force to be reckoned with. But Tommy Frazier played the entire game while Brooke Berringer played sparingly, mostly in garbage time. So this is why I feel like college football doesn't have the same luxury of drama when it comes to quarterback controversies. Because in college football, you don't have, there's a lot of great teams in college football. Every year, it's not about star players, it's about great teams. Michigan last year was a great team. Georgia over the last few years was a great team. Like the quarterbacks themselves, I mean, they were good quarterbacks for them, but it was never a situation where they had to fight off the backup quarterback to get an opportunity for a job. And then you look at LSU, another great team. Joe Burrow, without question, he was the quarterback. So there was not going to be any issue there in that matter. I just think the biggest problem is college football is so like enjoyable to watch because you don't seem to care about who's the starting quarterback. Yes, you want to have the best quarterback you can have to win the game in there, but there's hardly a case where you have a team that has two great quarterbacks or has a quarterback that's a great quarterback, the backup quarterback maybe hasn't proven himself, but he's playing so well that next thing you know, you have this starting quarterback. There isn't a lot of that in college football. Now, in the NFL, it's pretty different for that matter. I mean, you think back to the Cowboys. I know things are not going well for Dak Prescott, but let's go back to 2014 or 2016 actually, when Dak Prescott was a rookie quarterback. He was supposed to be the backup quarterback to Tony Romo. Romo gets injured during preseason. Prescott plays so well that next thing you know, Jason Garrett has to make a tough decision. Do you go with the starting quarterback or do you go with the backup quarterback? Well, they ultimately decided to go with Dak Prescott, and Prescott proved to work himself to be the right decision for Dallas that year. They finished with the best record in the NFC. He wins Rookie of the Year, and well, obviously things haven't gone well for him since, but it was a remarkable achievement for Dak Prescott. Now, going back to the quarterback controversy of Texas, or supposed quarterback controversy of Texas, people are saying that Quinn Ewers is the quarterback. And I think it's fair to say that regardless of what you think, Quinn Ewers deserves to stick with the team. I think for Texas fans, they should have comfort knowing that, look, if Quinn Ewers goes down again, they have Arch Manning to back up. I don't think you should look at it as Arch Manning should be the starting quarterback over Quinn Ewers because number one, Quinn Ewers got injured. Number two, he might have not had his best game against Oklahoma despite going 20 of 29 for 200 yards and an interception. But Quinn Ewers came to Texas for a reason. He was the guy that led the Longhorns to the college football playoff semifinals against Washington. And I think it's a little bit disappointing to say that there shouldn't be a case. Plus, I'm not taking anything away from Arch Manning. What if Arch Manning has his own struggles? What if he's the starting quarterback and he struggles? Who's going to be the quarterback for Texas now? So I feel like, Quinn Ewers should stay the starting quarterback for Texas because right now, if I had to choose between the two sides who is more likely to lead Texas to a national championship game, I would throw in Quinn Ewers. I'm not taking anything away from Arch Manning, but when you look at what he achieved this season, Quinn Ewers against Michigan, he destroyed him for 246 yards and 3 touchdowns. Against Alabama last season, in what was the last year of Nick Saban, 349 yards for 3 touchdowns against Nick Saban's defense. This is an opportunity that I feel like you need to stick with the guy that's been the best quarterback arguably the best quarterback in college football. Most people might say Jalen Monroe. Most people, might throw in another quarterback, for Oregon or for Ohio State or what have you. But at the end of the day, Quinn Ewers is the guy, that should be the leader. He should be the one starting because he has the experience. He has the leadership, and that's something that, Arch Manning, I don't want to say doesn't have yet, but he will get there if he does stay for Texas, because I think once Quinn Ewers leaves, Arch Manning is going to be the backup quarterback. And despite the fact that Arch comes from a very famous family, you're going to have to learn from a guy that's been there before. So ultimately, I feel like Quinn Ewers should be the starting quarterback for Texas. And I would definitely like to see Arch Manning be in there eventually, and I know he's going to get his chance. But for the time being, if you're Texas, if you're a fan of the Texas Longhorns, and you're asking yourself, who do I want as a starting quarterback? Your best bet to win, especially on Sunday, is again with Quinn Ewers starting against Georgia. So, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there's a quarterback controversy like some fans want to say. But ultimately, you should play, Quinn Ewers at this point. And because Quinn Ewers eventually recovered, he turned it around after a slow start. It's not how you start, but it's how you finish. And Quinn Ewers was definitely the best quarterback on the field that day. I don't know if Arch Manning would have put up the same type of numbers. I think he would have led Texas to win over Oklahoma, but it wouldn't have been as dominant as before. So at the end of the day, there was without question that Quinn Ewers should be the quarterback for Texas, unless he gets hurt, and then you throw in Arch Manning. But if Texas wants to win a national championship, for right now, there clearly has to be the right mindset that Quinn Ewers is the guy that's going to get him there to the national championship. Now, as far as this Saturday is concerned, Texas and Georgia, this is going to be a game that I feel will be the defining moment of the SEC. Because if Texas wins, they are a legitimate threat to not only win the SEC again after winning the Big 12 last year, but also to put themselves in the forefront of, national championship contention. If Georgia wins, they're a team that's still out there. They're still dangerous, no matter how you look at it. They may not be the best, team right now in college football, despite being number 5 in the nation. But my goodness gracious, they're still dangerous. I mean, look at what Georgia has to play after Texas. You got Florida, you got Ole Miss, you got Tennessee, you got UMass, you got Georgia Tech. I'm looking at this Georgia team thinking that they can win all 5 games, though that Tennessee game might be a little bit of a challenge. Same thing with Ole Miss, because that game's in Oxford. But man, if Georgia wins this game, that's going to give them the confidence boost to make a run, at least push for an SEC championship. They're going to make the playoffs. With 12 teams, there's no question Georgia's going to make the playoff. But man, winning against Texas in Austin would be huge. And for Texas, this is a game that you have to win to let everyone know that you are seriously back. You're more than just back, that you are a legitimate threat to win it all. You are a contender. You have made a statement by beating the Georgia Bulldogs, who were the best college football team collectively over the last 3 years and won 2 national championships. You would have made a big statement. So this is an opportunity for Texas to take advantage of. And I think this will be the best game Texas will play and the best game Georgia will play this season. So I think it's going to be a real close game. I'm going to pick Texas to beat Georgia at home. And I think it's going to be a close game. Going to come down to maybe a game-winning drive or so. Or maybe Georgia is threatening to drive and Texas intercepts it. So I think it's going to be a legitimate game for both teams. Georgia definitely wanting to make a statement to win this game, keep themselves alive in the SEC race, while Texas looking to have firm grip of the rest of the season. So it should be a great game for the two teams as well. And speaking of greatness, I got a little interesting thing talking about President Obama with his starting lineup as far as who he has as his all-time starting lineup. I am surprised by his list. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back when we talk about former President Barack Obama. few weeks, Americans will get up, go to the lines, go to the voting booths, and cast their votes for the next president of the United States. But folks, you didn't come here to listen to me talk about politics. Because let's be realistic here. Here's the way I view about these elections, about, this whole deal with elections. People always say, the future of America is at stake. We must fix the issues. We are in a crisis mode right now. You must change the policies and everything. You say that every 4 years. And 3 years later, it's still a mess. Like, it's not perfect. There's issues. There's always going to be issues. Like, I'm just sick and tired when people over-exaggerate. I don't care about elections. I don't care about politics. I mean, if y'all do, then I completely understand and respect your decision, but gosh darn it. Like, I can't even trust the people voting in office, like, that are running for office. Now, I don't care who wins. I just don't even bother. Like, I might have made it a big deal about meeting the president as a young kid. And yes, I did vote in 2 elections. I voted for Mitt Romney, and then I voted for an old friend of mine. I'm not friends with any of the candidates, but let's be realistic here. I just don't care. I just think it's crazy how our world, our country, is being divided up by these political crises. Instead of talking about it, we're arguing, we're attacking each other, this and that. Like, we can't even have a respectful conversation. And that's the same for Republicans and Democrats. But that's my quick political rant here, because nobody cared to listen to that. But anyways, the reason why I bring this up is because everybody has a starting lineup. An all-time great basketball starting lineup. And one of those people happens to be former President Barack Obama. Now, we all know Barack Obama is a sports fan. Every year when he was president, around March Madness, he would always make his predictions for who he thought was going to win the national championship that year. And it was always great segments. To have a guy that was a legitimate sports fan as president of the United States, whether you agreed with his policies or disagreed with his policies, that's a really cool thing. But that's just the way I look at it to this point. But anyway, Barack Obama was asked to give his all-time starting 5. And folks, I'm going to play the recording of what he says. This is from a tweet from Courtside Heat. I just made a rhyme there. This is from a tweet from Courtside Heat. At least that's the Twitter account. But yeah, I definitely thought it was really cool to see Barack Obama give out his all-time starting lineup list. So anyways, folks, let's go right ahead and tune into what Barack Obama said as far as who his all-time starting lineup is.
I'm basketball fan Barack Obama. I'm going to talk about my favorite starting 5. If I just put together a team where I would enjoy watching it and I think they'd beat anybody. I'm from Chicago. MJ, Michael Jordan at shooting guard. I'd put LeBron at point forward. A bunch of times he'd be bringing up the ball and he'd be distributing. He'd basically be doing some of the stuff that he did recently in the Olympics, and that is a pretty good approximation of what Magic Johnson could do. But I want a little shooting and a little flair. I'm going to put my friend Steph Curry into the mix because we're in the three-point era and he is the greatest shooter of all time, bar none. At center, I'm going to put Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon, whose game I think translates to today's game. He was such an amazing athlete, an anchor on defense. He's going to give you everything you need out of the center position. This last spot is tough, but I think, especially given today's game, I've got to go with Kevin Durant, KD, who may be the most efficient, effective scorer in the history of basketball. I'm feeling pretty good about that 5, beating just about anybody. From one basketball fan to another, I hope you watch Starting 5 only on Netflix.
So a couple of things I forgot to point out. This is kind of him doing a promo for a Netflix show called Starting 5, which comes out. Like, y'all remember the football versions of quarterback? Like you have the quarterback position, you have the wide receiver position, where they basically give insight on specific quarterbacks from around the NFL, specific wide receivers from around the NFL over the past 2 seasons. They do it on a year-to-year basis, depending on the position as well. I wonder if they're going to do something for running backs this year. But anyways, it was a Netflix show called Quarterback or Wide Receiver. This time they're doing something pertaining to the NBA, which is the starting five, where they basically take 5 players and they go a season insight to each player, not only for their stuff on the court but for stuff off the court. So, anyways, that being said, so that was Barack Obama's starting five. So basically, he said that he was biased because he's from Chicago, and yeah, he's a diehard Chicago sports fan, and I respect that. Michael Jordan, of course, is going to be on his starting five for sure at the shooting guard position, which is very fair. He has Steph Curry, who is a point guard. Now, I feel like with Steph Curry, he's a point guard, but he's also like a shooter. He's kind of like a hybrid position. Like, eventually, a guy like Steph Curry is going to create a sixth position on a basketball court, which you're going to have a hard time finding a hybrid type player to have that as well. But I feel like if you want to be a point guard, you got to be the one to dish out the rock. You can score, but I think Steph Curry is a better shooter than he is a passer, in my personal opinion, even though Steph Curry has had his occasion for assist making. LeBron James obviously is on the list, because of the impact he's had in recent years as a small forward kind of player. So he's on there. Then he had a very interesting decision, Kevin Durant, which I thought was kind of curious, just the fact that Kevin Durant, who, yes, he had his dominant years with the Warriors, but he can't lead a team. That's my thing. I think Kevin Durant is a better workhorse than he is a leader. Like, yeah, he joined the Warriors, but he was like the workhorse. Steph was the leader, but Kevin Durant was the workhorse guy. I think he's a better workhorse player than he is as a leader. And yeah, you can tell me about the stats he put up with the Oklahoma City Thunder before he went to the Warriors and all that, but I just think Kevin Durant can't lead a team by himself. I think that's just hard, and that's something that he's going to have applied pressure to, trying to win a championship for the Phoenix Suns, which may or may not happen after a while. Now, here's where it got really interesting. It got really surprising to me. Barack Obama, for his center, has Hakeem Olajuwon. And let me tell you something, folks. I'm always going to put Hakeem Olajuwon as my center. But I was surprised when Barack Obama put Hakeem Olajuwon over on his list as a center. Because in my opinion, when it comes to a lot of these starting five lists, the guy that's usually been on the center position on most, if not every one, has been Shaquille O'Neal. And rightfully so. Shaq has been the most dominant center in the history of the NBA with the way he played the strong force in the postgame. Well, the guy that boxes you out, that can bulldoze over you, and just with his strength. He's flamboyant. He's very charismatic. He's got 4 NBA championships. He won an MVP award. He was part of one of the best teams ever assembled in NBA history with the 2001 Lakers alongside Kobe Bryant. So I thought, because of the maybe a little bit of media bias, or maybe because it's a popular choice, that Barack Obama was going to pick Shaquille O'Neal. And I wouldn't disagree with him. I just wouldn't put Shaq on my list. But man, I'm surprised that he actually put Hakeem Olajuwon. Now, maybe because he was a Bulls fan, and he probably has a sneaking suspicion that had Michael Jordan not retired, chances are we would have gotten a Bulls-Rockets finals. And we might disagree on who wins, because I know the truth, and the truth is that the Rockets would have at least gotten the Bulls one time in the finals, maybe 2. But because the Rockets had great success against the Bulls during their first 3-peat years, they were 5-1, and Michael Jordan himself said, hey, it's a good thing the Rockets can't get out of the West, because, man, we had no answer for Hakeem Olajuwon. So, yeah, I was very surprised when I saw that Barack Obama put down Hakeem Olajuwon. And I think, for someone that's a sports fan, he knows his stuff. He knows basketball. And I really think that Hakeem Olajuwon deserves more credit and more praise, because I think the basketball players, the guys that study basketball hard, or were dedicated to the craft, they know Hakeem Olajuwon. they know how good he was, especially during the years the Rockets won the championships. And they also know the impact of the Dream Shake and how it was so hard to guard that move. Like, you can make a case it's the greatest move in the history of, the NBA. I mean, you could talk the Euro step, you could talk Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's skyhook, you could talk whatever. But man, Hakeem Olajuwon should get more praise and should get more recognition for his play. And Barack Obama definitely agrees right there. I mean, let's be realistic. Hakeem Olajuwon during the 1990s was the best center in the NBA. He was the second best player in the NBA behind Michael Jordan during the 90s. Not just because he won 2 championships, but the impact that he had, the performances, like the Dream Shakes. Like, come on. How many times can you get goosebumps watching Hakeem Olajuwon outplay league MVP David Robinson in 1995, moments after David Robinson received the award on the home court, which happened to be the same game where Olajuwon was right there, and he embarrassed him? How many times are we going to watch Hakeem Olajuwon outperform Patrick Ewing, being the deciding factor for the Rockets to win the championship in 1994? And listen, you can give me all the grief you want about how Shaq wasn't in his prime in 1995 when the Rockets swept the Magic, but dude, who cares? Olajuwon torched him. Olajuwon just outperformed Shaq, swept them in the finals that year. Back-to-back MVPs. The guy's the all-time leader in block shots. Okay, Hakeem Olajuwon is. I'm willing to admit that if block shots were around during Bill Russell's day, he would be the all-time block shots leader. But the fact is, Hakeem Olajuwon is the all-time leader in block shots. I mean, this is so crazy how we're not respecting Hakeem Olajuwon. Like, an MVP, okay? This guy didn't start playing basketball until he was 16 years old. 16 years old! 16 years old from Nigeria, where they don't even have basketball, or they didn't have basketball when he was playing. It was soccer, handball, and other sporting events that were going on there, but not basketball. He didn't start playing until he was 16 years old, and he ends up being a top 10 great player of all time, arguably a top 10 great player of all time. I mean, how does that happen? How does a guy that didn't play basketball until he was 16 years old go on to be among the greatest of all time, with players that started playing basketball much earlier, before their teens, much earlier than 10 years old for that matter? How does that happen? I mean, it's just so remarkable, and it's so crazy when you think about that story. Like, the only other thing that kind of compares to it is Michael Olowokandi, who actually didn't start playing basketball until he was 18 years old, yet somehow worked his way up to wind up being the number 1 pick in the NBA draft in 1998. Now, of course, Michael Olowokandi is one of the biggest busts in NBA history. Okay, let's be realistic there. So I'm not comparing Olowokandi to Hakeem Olajuwon. Olajuwon outduels Michael Olowokandi anytime. But we can talk about Hakeem Olajuwon being the all-time shot block leader. We can talk about the Dream Shake. We can talk about, the championships that he won. We could talk about his battles with Jabbar, with Shaq, Ewing, Robinson, even his battles with Michael Jordan, for that matter. I know they play 2 different positions, but man, we can make a legitimate case that Hakeem Olajuwon is a great player, one of the greatest of all time, maybe the greatest of all time. Maybe the greatest center of all time, depending on where you look at him. I just want him to be in the top 10 greatest players of all time list. He may not be top 5 to most people, but if he's not in your top 10 list, then I'm sorry, you got some serious, serious problems when it comes to basketball IQ. But here's why Hakeem Olajuwon deserves a little bit more respect. You know how many players have gone to him in the offseason to work on the post-game skill? Because there's still that element of post-game that is valuable in the NBA. Why do you think Kobe Bryant is one of the greatest of all time? Why do you think Kobe Bryant elevated his game even after Shaq left? He went to Hakeem Olajuwon and said, hey man, I need some help working on my post game, or working moves for me in the post, even though I'm a guard. And you watch some of Kobe Bryant's highlights, he's backing up his defenders inside, and then he turns around, fires a fadeaway jumper. He may do a little pump fake here and then put up a shot here and there. Like, you just don't see that. Like, Kobe is not a 7-foot center. He's a 6'7", or I forget how tall he was, but he was a guy that was willing to learn from that. You see that with LeBron James in some of his performances. You know, you saw that with Dwight Howard at times, Amari Stoudemire. You know, like, look, not every player can max or perfect Hakeem Olajuwon's moves in the post. Like, we can talk about Alperen Sengun for the Rockets now. Here's a guy that will definitely be someone to watch over the years, whether he continues in Houston or goes to another team. Here's a guy that is learning to perfect his craft. And he's still a young buck for that matter. But man, Hakeem Olajuwon is a great teacher. And I don't care what you say, Gilbert Arenas. You might disagree, but you know what? You have a terrible record when it comes to your takes. You have a terrible win-loss record on your takes of certain things because you are dead wrong with your viewpoints of Hakeem Olajuwon. That's a story for another day for that matter, but I mean, let's talk about it. I mean, Hakeem Olajuwon is not only a big influencer in the post-game, but you see how many players are winning MVPs, they're winning championships. They're not, like, foreign-born players are starting to take over the NBA. Nikola Jokic has already won 3 MVPs. He's from Serbia. You know, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, one of the greatest point guards of all time. They're from Argentina and France, respectively. I mean, Giannis, another MVP, a guy that won a championship. He's from Greece. And then Victor Wembanyama, still a young guy, but is already making a big impact in the NBA. 7 feet 4 inches, African descent from France. Like, we're seeing foreign-born players stepping up and, you know, contributing to the NBA. The NBA is getting global. And Hakeem Olajuwon is one of, if not the biggest reasons why. Because how many players could you say came from Africa, an African country like Nigeria or Kenya or Egypt or a country that is down there, even South Africa? How many players can you say made a big impact in the NBA before Hakeem Olajuwon did from Africa? You can't really name a guy that played in the NBA at that time. But Hakeem Olajuwon certainly comes in, and we're seeing a flow of not only players from Africa, but also players from Europe and everything. Like, there's always going to be some debate about who was really the pioneer, but I feel like with the amount of foreign-born players that are coming into the NBA, you have to look at Hakeem Olajuwon as the go-to guy. You have to, because when he came in, foreign-born players were not seen as valuable assets or valuable guys that can contribute. There were some good ones, obviously, but Hakeem Olajuwon had to be one of the first players, if not the first player, to come in and make a tremendous impact for foreign-born players. And that's why later on you see all these other talented players coming in from Europe, from Asia, from Australia, and that's continuing even to this day. And I feel like we need to look at Hakeem Olajuwon as more than just a shot block artist or a two-time NBA champion, an MVP, or a guy that mastered one of the greatest moves of all time. And we have to look at him as a trailblazer for these international players coming in. And the reason I bring all this up is because there's a book that was written by Miran Fader, or I don't know how to pronounce her name, and if I mispronounce your name, I apologize in advance. But she wrote the book called Dream, The Life and Legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon. Now, she had already written one on Giannis, so I'm really excited to read this book on Hakeem Olajuwon because I feel like Hakeem Olajuwon has been due an autobiography longer than anyone else. And this should be a real exciting book to read for me. Maybe it's just me being biased as a Rockets fan, but man, I'm just looking forward to seeing how, Hakeem's life and Hakeem's development into one of the greatest players of all time came through. Because, man, I'll tell you what, if you go to the Rockets games in the 90s, you definitely were going to not leave disappointed because Hakeem Olajuwon was going to put on a show for you. He may have not had the flash of magic. He may have not talked a lot of trash like Larry Bird, or he might not have been the greatest player on a basketball court anytime they played the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. But I'll tell you what, Hakeem Olajuwon would definitely not leave you disappointed. New York fans, San Antonio, Orlando, Phoenix, Utah, man, they know what Hakeem Olajuwon was. And I'm sure everywhere else in Chicago, Indiana, or Miami, for that matter, or even Seattle. Now, Seattle knows how good Hakeem Olajuwon is. Okay? Let's just be realistic there. But anyways, I just thought it was so crazy how Barack Obama mentioned Hakeem Olajuwon in his starting five when I thought he was going to pick Shaq, which would have been a very, I don't want to say, the wrong decision, but it certainly would not have been it would have been a very popular decision to pick Shaq just because of the charismatic personality that he brought to the table. And I have nothing against Shaq. I think Shaq's a great player. He's definitely a top 10 player. But if you ask me who I'm picking at center all time, I'm picking Hakeem Olajuwon as my center on my all-time starting lineup. In fact, while we're at it, I'm going to throw in Michael Jordan. I'm going to throw in, I'll throw Steph Curry in there, even though he's technically a point guard or a shooting guard. And then I'll probably throw Kobe Bryant in as a small three. And then Tim Duncan. So I'm going to go with Curry, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, and Hakeem Olajuwon as my all-time starting five. So that is the way I look at it, in a sense. And speaking of looking at things, folks, we're going to step aside, but when we come back, I'm going to make a quick prediction for my Week 7 predictions. Hopefully, I do a better job. Well, I mean, how can you do better than 13-1 unless you go 14-0? Hopefully, I don't make any stupid predictions this time, but we'll see. So anyways, folks, we're going to step aside. We'll be right back for this next segment. Stay tuned. All right, folks, it's time now for my predictions to close out this segment. And after going 13-1 last week, I am 62-30, which is a remarkable prediction record, considering the fact that last week we had 14 games. But man, 32 games over 500. That is insane. Like, I've only had 1 week where I've had a losing record, and that was week 2 when I went 7-9. But since then, I've had 2 500s and also 2 13-win weeks. So hopefully maybe I get something along the lines of 10 wins or so this week. Now, again, there's going to be 14, or actually, I think there's going to be 15 games. Yes, 15 games this week. And the 2 teams that are on the bye for Week 7, of course, are the Chicago Bears and the Dallas Cowboys. And if I were the Cowboys right now, I'd probably be thinking, man, this is a perfect time to evaluate our situation. Maybe see if we can, make some changes around. Try to convince Jerry Jones, dude, just stop. Just stop, being the general manager, owner, having things run your way. We want to be the Cowboys, but you gotta step aside, man. Like, time has passed by. So, but knowing Jerry, he's probably going to be like, no way. I am not stepping down. I am confident that this team will be successful, and I'll continue to get the branding and, have money go our way to keep the Cowboys America's team. That's my attempt at Jerry Jones, which I'm sure I probably failed at. So, yeah, don't blame me for that matter. But anyway, Bears and Cowboys have the bye week. My Week 7 predictions are as follows. I'm picking New Orleans to beat Denver. I know Denver, this is a big game for Sean Payton going up against his former team and now as the head coach of the Denver Broncos. This is an opportunity for him to get some revenge as well. But I just feel like, the New Orleans Saints are going to figure out a way. They haven't won a game over in a month or so. They're coming off a bad loss to Tampa Bay, 51-27, which was really shocking. But, you're playing at home. You have an opportunity to turn things around. And I think this is going to be a fired-up game. So I think New Orleans does break its slump this week against the Denver Broncos. So I'm picking Denver to lose to New Orleans. Then we have New England against Jacksonville. I was really impressed with Drake May against the Texans in his first start. And I think he's going to have a similar type game against Jacksonville. So I think New England will get the win against the Jaguars, so it shouldn't come as a surprise. Minnesota coming off a bye week, but they're taking on Detroit. This is going to be a very big game. NFC North matchup. The two best teams, arguably, in the division. Undefeated Minnesota versus Detroit, coming off a killer of a win against the Dallas Cowboys. This is a tough one to call. I mean, I feel like the Lions could, remind the Vikings that they run the division after last year, but I think Minnesota might be fresh off their bye, ready to go. So I think it's going to be a big win for Minnesota to continue their undefeated start. I do think eventually that they're going to lose a game, and this would be a game that I could see them lose. But I think Minnesota having a home field advantage against Detroit, that's going to be a really good game for Minnesota to win. We got Buffalo against the Tennessee Titans. The Bills added Amari Cooper in a massive trade to help out their wide receivers position, and I think that's going to pay immediate dividends. I see Buffalo beating Tennessee pretty much, so we'll see how that plays out for Josh Allen in hopes to get back to being an MVP contender. The Indianapolis Colts against the Miami Dolphins. Now, I was disappointed to learn that Anthony Richardson was going to start over Joe Flacco because, I feel like you need to go with the hot hand here. Like, you need to go with Joe Flacco. He's been playing very well against Miami, but they feel confident that Richardson is going to get back to form. So just in case, I said that Indianapolis is going to beat Miami for this one. Seattle and Atlanta. Now, of course, the Falcons have this game at home. They're 4-2, while Seattle is 3-3. This will be a very tough one for me to tell. It just depends on what day Atlanta shows up, but I'm willing to take a chance and say that I think Seattle is probably going to knock off Atlanta, looking to get themselves back in the NFC West race. Then we got the big game between the Green Bay Packers and the Houston Texans. This is a battle between two young teams that took a big step last year, looking to make even bigger steps this year. Now, again, the Texans are without Nico Collins, but they do have the running game back of Joe Mixon. However, the Packers are with Jordan Love, who is back and seems to be playing very well. This is going to be a bit of a tough game for the Texans. In fact, I'll be realistically here. I had the Texans starting 6-0 at least before they fell to the Green Bay Packers this week. So, as much as I would hate to bet against my team, I got to go with the business side here. I think Green Bay is going to get this one. It's in Lambeau Field. The conditions are warm. And certainly the Texans are going to be, without Mario Edwards, who has just been suspended 4 games because of substance abuse policies. But they do return Danico Autry, who also served a suspension very similar. So it should be a tough game for the Texans. I wouldn't be surprised if the Texans won. And this is a game that I feel like they need to win to keep themselves up for a top seed in the AFC. But I think the Texans might take an L on this one. So, sorry, Houston. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong, please. Cincinnati and Cleveland. I mean, I think the Browns are in tank mode. I think the Bengals have this one. I mean, it could be a close game, but Cincinnati, to me, was going to get the win there. Then you got Philadelphia and New York. I don't know what's going on with Philadelphia, to tell you the truth. They just seem to have a lot of issues. And Nick Sirianni, of course, is more and more in the hot seat, and this is a game that I think is going to be a tough one for Philly, but I don't think they're going to lose. I'm picking Philly to beat the Giants, because anytime you have Daniel Jones on the other side, there's always a chance that you can win that game. But Daniel Jones has been known to surprise some teams. The Raiders and the Rams, and this one is tough because now without Devontae Adams, the Raiders are in a very tight predicament here, and I think this is going to be a game that the Rams, they're 1-4 right now. They're not looking so well, but I think at some point the Rams are going to get it together and figure out a way to win this one. Otherwise, you might be potentially seeing one of the last few times of Matthew Stafford as the quarterback. So I think the Rams will get this one, beat the Raiders. We got Washington and Carolina between number 1 pick from last year, Bryce Young, against number 2 pick from this past year, Jaden Daniels. I think Jaden Daniels continues to ball out very well. Or actually, it's not. I think it's still Andy Dalton, the quarterback for Carolina, not Bryce Young. So my legitimate chance. But Carolina might have a little bit of say here. They could knock off the Commanders. They have been known to surprise. Well, I say they've been known to surprise, but I feel like at some point Carolina is going to figure out a way to get its act together, but I just don't see it this week against Washington. I think Washington maintains their lead in the NFC East. The big Super Bowl rematch, Kansas City versus San Francisco. Man, I mean, you can go either way with this one. The game's in San Francisco, so the 49ers will have home field advantage there. The Chiefs are 5-0. The 49ers are 3-3. It's going to be a tough one for that matter. But, man, as much as it would be cool to see the 49ers get a little bit measure of revenge, it won't erase the sting from the Super Bowl loss. And I just think the way the Chiefs are going right now, I think they're starting to figure things out despite all the injury situations they got. And Travis Kelce starting to get back to his old form. Hopefully he continues to play well. I'm picking Kansas City to win that one, so it's a tough call between that game. We got the Steelers and the Jets. Pittsburgh making a transition to go with Russell Wilson, going up against Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets, who have recently traded for Devontae Adams, and that's going to be an interesting reunion. I don't know if that's going to pan out well for the New York Jets. Yes, they lost by 3 to Buffalo on Monday night, but you're taking on a Pittsburgh team that is making a change as well, and I just don't think it was the right call to turn to Russell Wilson. It's going to be a tough one. I think I'm picking the Jets just because Aaron Rodgers will figure out a way to bounce back after a tough slide, and I think having Devontae Adams will definitely pay dividends for them. Baltimore and Tampa. This is one of the 2 Monday night games. Baker Mayfield against Lamar Jackson, 2 Heisman Trophy winners going against each other. Oh boy. I mean, you can go either way with this one. But I feel like the Ravens are starting to pick up where they left off. They started 0-2. They've won 4 straight. They're probably the hottest team in the NFL as of this moment. But then you got Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield, who's definitely having a revival down there. It's going to be a tough one. I'm willing to think that Baltimore will figure out a way to continue its momentum, so I'm picking Baltimore as well. And finally, we have the Chargers and the Cardinals, the other Monday night game. And as punishment for me picking the Cardinals to beat the Packers last week, which would have given me a perfect record, I am going to go and pick the Chargers to beat the Cardinals. I just think the Cardinals deserve a little bit of punishment for letting me down. So ultimately, this is the way I look at it. I've got the Saints, the Patriots, the Vikings, the Bills, the Colts, the Seahawks, the Packers, the Bengals, the Eagles, the Rams, the Commanders, the Chiefs, the Jets, the Ravens, and the Chargers all winning their games this week. So that is my prediction for Week 7. We'll see how I do this time around. But anyways, folks, that's going to wrap it up for me this occasion. Hey, thank you very much for listening into my podcast. I hope you guys have yourselves a tremendous day. Remember, if you want to subscribe to my podcast, feel free to go to my YouTube channel at KWCLINE91 if you want to watch it visually. However, if you want to listen to it audioly, if there is ever a word of audioly, that would be really nice. But if you want to listen to it audioly, go to Podbean or Spotify. That's where you'll get my podcast, Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. So once again, it's KWCLINE91 on my YouTube channel. And then, of course, my podcast on audio. It's Podbean and Spotify. So that's going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time on another episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock.